Welcome today, you guys. Chestnut Checkers. I am Keith Riddle, sitting here with my co-host Jordan Tampien, and today we have an exciting podcast lined up with the former mayor of Spokane, David Condon. David, thanks for joining us.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, what's new in David's world to start off with, and then let's dive back. But yeah,
what's new?
Yeah.
Well, every day is new for me. I've got 3 kids. So I have a 16-year-old, a 15-year-old, and an 11-year-old. So a lot of our life revolves around them. My oldest son has his first job, so he went to an interview, had a little suit on, the whole gig. So he's working at a pharmacy. Got his license, here in December, his full-blown license. My daughter's an 8th
driver's license, not pharmaceutical license.
Yeah, exactly, right. True, yes.
It's an early kid achiever.
Yeah. He is a genius.
Don't go to that pharmacy, no, and then my daughter's in 8th grade, and, she can't wait to graduate and join her brother in high school.
Nice.
And then my son, Beck, is just starting up basketball. Not just starting, but the season is just starting for him.
Nice.
My daughter just finished hers. This is the Catholic parochial system. So, a lot of competition in that league,
So true.
So we spend a lot of our Sundays at the Gonzaga Prep Gym, back-to-back games. So, a lot of our life revolves around that. I also in the health plan business and split my time here, Seattle. Our headquarters is just north of Seattle in Mountain Lake Terrace. And we also are licensed in Alaska. So I spend some time in Alaska. And But all new things revolve around our kids. So
That's pretty cool.
So, fill me in. How long's it been since you were...
it's kind of crazy. It's been 5 years, which is interesting because... people remember me as the former mayor.
Of course.
But, I've kind of had these, like 3 different careers. I grew up here in Spokane, born and bred, youngest kid of 9, big Irish Catholic family. Went to Boston to go to college, thanks to the United States Army. So then my first career was in the Army. I was in the Army for 9 years. And I was a medical service officer, started in the infantry, was an aide to the commanding general of the Pacific for medical operations, one of the first 2-star women, which was fascinating to kind of be a fly on the wall watching, her, and but also had the opportunity to serve in the 25th Infantry Division, supporting, light infantry soldiers, and was at Fort Lewis, now JBLM, on 9/11, and then left that, and then spent a couple of years of all things I left the Army and joined the Navy. I worked for a group that had bought, not literally,
Natural.
I bought, bought a subsidiary of Foss Maritime, and those of you on the west side, Foss Maritime, you see the white and green tugboats and in the Puget Sound. But over here they had a small operation on Coeur d'Alene. So I worked. They had I think 9 tugboats and used to haul the lumber, the logs, from St. Mary's up to what now is Riverstone, that used to be Stimson Lumber.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so we would haul roughly 1 million board feet a month in the big log, corrals, and then we'd corral them in Cougar Bay there. Mm-hmm. And then they would go over more retail style into Stimson Lumber. And so did that, left that, and then spent 7.5 years in the federal government, working in Congress for our member of Congress, and then got the crazy idea to run for mayor.
Are you like
every 7
years
to
old?
9 years.
Was there a plan to it? Was there like a plan?
Zero plan. I go back, it's kind of hilarious. I obviously had I was in high school debate, and was interested in politics. I often joke. My dad was one of my best friends, but, I was the youngest of 9, so my dad was not throwing the football with me, as a kid, and I was no athlete, but what my dad was doing is he was getting involved in politics, so I used to do stuff with him, so that was kind of he was later in his career. He was a dentist, and at that time, it was the big debate over nationalized health care in the Clinton administration. And so my dad was getting super active here locally because Washington was kind of leading the pack there. And so that's literally, how I got involved in politics, and not really, would help on campaigns. My dad, knew a lot of the folks because he was getting involved just as an industry guy, in this case, healthcare industry, in particular dentistry. And so that's how I kind of saw, politics, but then really was away from it for years.
Yeah.
I mean, the entire time I was in college or in the Army,
Military,
in the Army, you're military, you're not allowed, and personally you can do it, but, I just wasn't. I was in places I didn't even know who the representatives were. So anyway, I say all that, that's kind of what had gotten my toe into politics.
So what was the decision to run for mayor? Like, what was that? Just like that moment, that period of time? I'm just curious. Like, when did you just be like, I'm going to run for mayor?
Well, I think, I was at that point, I had been working in the federal office. I wasn't really attuned to what was happening locally, politically, but I was just like a guy with a kid, and saying this, and it wasn't, and think about this. This was, 2010, the 2008 real estate, the recession. I was 35, and I was just like, I just didn't feel the energy yet. At the same time, it was about the same time, I used to see the commercials that the Visitors Bureau was putting out when Harry Sladage was there, and and we had just we had the new Davenport Hotel, and there was this really upbeat commercial showing the doorman, and it's with the building right behind him, and it was just like, wow, but it just didn't feel that was happening. But then it was just like this, nothing else was happening, and it was, it was that altruistic. I was just like, we got to have something better, and I was finally, I had bought my first house, or it happened to be a condo at the time. I was married, had a child, and I'm just like, we got to do something different. And it wasn't like we were doing anything wrong. I'll be honest with you, the mayor at the time, she was not doing anything wrong. She just, there was, and really what cemented it, our friends over the Inlander will love this, but they had a cover story on the Invisible Mayor. Maybe I'm quoting it wrong, but I think, and that was the gist. Maybe it was even named, the article was that. But it was this whole, like, what's happening? Who's in leadership? What's going on? And that's where I was like, you know what? We're going to do this. And so I literally quit my job and lived on savings for several months, 7-9 months. And just, my wife jumped in both feet, she knocked on 20,000+ doors. And
wow.
Jeez.
And it's all in hindsight now. And obviously you're going to win. I lost the primary. It was the largest, largest turnaround in state history from primary to general.
Really?
And so the reality is, I did all this work, and I kind of knew how to do it. Obviously, I'd worked for a politician, so I had a big kickoff with a couple hundred people there. I remember it backed up all the traffic over here at the DoubleTree. Yeah. So I had all this energy, but then all of a sudden the general happened, and it was just like, oh
wow.
So I was just like,
all the votes were in that room.
I was just like, 200 votes. I remember we did a poll, and like no one had a clue who I was. And if it wasn't, if it was single digits, if it wasn't single digits, it was low double digits of people even had heard my name, and I'm like, well, we're just going to put our head down and just plow through November, and I'll go back and work in, one nice thing, my boss at the time gave me a leave of absence, so I didn't fill the position, so I was at least, I know, well, by Christmas, I'll be back in my old job.
Worst case, I'm there.
and paying off a bunch of bills that I'd racked up over those months, because I still had a mortgage, I still had, a house to pay for, and kids, and so anyway, that's, so it was, there wasn't, if there was it was just a multitude of different things like any of us, but I just had this gut instinct. And I'll be honest with you, the opportunity costs as you get older, it gets greater, right? Yeah. I've been listening to some of your podcasts, and that whole gut instinct of being an entrepreneur and, and just having the grit to do it, it takes a ton. And whether that be in business or in that case, politics, you're staring at your kids.
The good thing is that the advice you get from a lot of entrepreneurs about being an entrepreneur and how difficult it is and just to push through are the entrepreneurs that made it.
Yeah, exactly. You never hear from ones that didn't. They had to go back to that job that was helpful.
You don't hear about the guy who tried 3 times and all 3 didn't work out.
Wait, going through that process, because I know you worked for it, but did you get a better appreciation for everything she had to do to get there, or like were you more jaded by that whole electoral process by the time you went through?
I am a big believer in the electoral process. And
cool.
people get frustrated with the money that's raised or the time you spend campaigning. To me, when you really actually look at it, the reality is the average donation to many of our elected officials on both sides of the aisle and in between are, they're usually somewhere in the $25 to $75 range. There's max, people are like, oh, you had, 100 people that gave you $1,000. Well, I'm not going to do something illegal for, and not only that, but you don't get that money. It, quite frankly, goes to media buys and consultants and polling. The individual doesn't get that money. They act like you're getting paid to take that money, and that just isn't. I mean, there's actually laws against that. So to me, but it does humble you as you do that. And in today's world, when you can hide behind a computer screen or that doesn't work. And that being said, there's a lot of engagement opportunities that I didn't have a Facebook site my first campaign, right?
Yours would be
this was 2011. I was running for office. The city didn't have an official Facebook, Twitter, or anything when I got there. I mean, we were still trying to figure, when we have one, and what does that look like? And so it seems like in some of these cases, it is a whole different world today. We were still literally knocking on doors. And
so when you first became mayor, what was that transition like? I mean, were you just walking in and like having to figure that out? Did you have some?
Oh, totally. I was 37. I had no clue.
Help me do this.
You have appointees that you need to run this. The city is, at the time, if my memory is correct, I think we were about a $680 million organization, and the city is interesting, or it's not. It's not typical. I wouldn't say it's atypical, but there's other cities that are this. But it's not common. The city is made up of 2 organizations when people think of the city government. It's made up of a utility company. That's your water, your sewer, and your garbage. So people are like, well, everybody does that. No, like if you live outside the city of Spokane, Waste Management, or picks up your. So that's a private company that picks up your garbage. Your sewer, in many cases, are private sewer districts, or not, quasi-private. Or the county has, the county government has a sewer system, but the city of Spokane has its own sewer system, and then not only that, but even water. Like you have Vera Water. The city has its own water company too, and so that's really financially and headcount wise a larger part of the city government in Spokane than the traditional city government departments. Think parks, libraries. Even in that case, there's other cities that don't have library departments. They utilize the county library district. And even the county government doesn't run the libraries. There's a separate governmental entity called the county libraries. And they get their own funding stream and all that. But at the city, it's all integrated. And so, but really, it's probably, I'm going to get this wrong, let's say 2/3 the utility company, 1/3, traditional government, and in that case, still has everything. We also don't have a fire district. Many cities use fire districts. And so in a lot of ways, you don't quite realize that. So it ends up being a big holding company with every president of those companies being kind of totally different. And they really, in a lot of ways, don't have anything in common, and in many ways are at opposite ends, because when you go to divide up the budget, that's, where do you take, and that's where, if there was one thing that I kind of demanded was I really instituted a mayor's cabinet, and that you're appointed by the mayor, represent the citizens, and your job was to get in each other's Wheaties, right? And to really find out and give opinions. If you're the park director, what do you think about the police department, vice versa, and this was not a time just to run your, we have, career professionals that run the departments. The appointed positions, which is 2 per department, should really work on how do you bring those different pieces together. And you do run it, but there's also career professionals that know that, but they aren't going to, many ways, like I said, they're at odds with the other departments because you're taking budget, and, it even happens in small companies, when you allocate budgets. But when I left, we were nearly $1 billion, or just, I think we had our first billion
over,
plus,
right?
just over. And quite frankly, we did that by growing the pie. We didn't raise taxes, but we really looked at, although the tax revenues increased because of what was happening and what we were able to do.
Yeah, think of all those MFTs coming online now.
Yeah, right.
Like, I think about that all the time because we sign up for them and it's 10 years out. In my head, I'm like, I'll never do this in 10 years. But all of a sudden, that'll come online.
That's rolling off,
It was a $0 piece of land, and now it comes on at $200,000 in taxes.
Yeah.
I'm going to take us back one step because I think some of the thing I love diving into is the mindset. And one thing I was trying to picture and put myself in your shoes was you went to the primary and lost basically pretty bad.
Oh, yeah.
What are you doing, like, mindset-wise? How do you still see the vision of sitting as mayor and you come off results like that? And I think that's kind of one of the unique things of everybody we met was they all experienced that. And now I'm hoping one day I get to do this too. I get to look back and I'm like, yeah, no, it was just this primary. And then I woke up and I end up being mayor, right? You blur time.
You're saying you're running for office? Is that what you're saying? I love that.
Not heard here. Not heard here. I'd be a good assistant. Right? But like,
heard here first.
Yeah, exactly. Right? No, I've seen enough where I'm like, I just don't think I'd be effective. I'd be so frustrated. And I'll dive into those questions. But like, put us in your shoes at that moment when you get those primary results, because we know what the end result is. It's like a good movie.
Yeah.
But somebody had to live that difference.
That was another Inlander article.
Yeah.
But,
It was.
I did have to take a big deep breath. One saying, well, I made it through the primary, and, only 2 make it through the primary. I forget everyone that was running that year in particular, but there was others, So we'd made it through the primary. I think we did take a break for a day or 2. And then, quite frankly, I was back on the phones and just put my head down and said, well, we're going to take this to the end. My wife was a huge strength. She, she sat me down. You put your name into this. You're going to go. And she was willing to put in the work. And so we continued to do that. We raised the money, which was difficult because people often.
Well, once you see the results of primary, you're like,
come on,
what horse are we betting on?
And at the time, there wasn't the mayor, had not. Made a lot of enemies. So there wasn't people that were real eager to sit there and say, and I was untested, and so, I had not been on city council, and there was, the infamous, the boy mayor, but I was young, there was that. And so, I think it was just that determination and that grit. And if nothing else, let's run through the end, and if this doesn't work out, at least we gave it a fight. There was a couple things, and I think that's that I was somewhat. The people are like, you've got to be kidding me, but I philosophically had a problem with, believe it or not, things. The number one reason I got elected was because of water rates, and at the time I had said earlier,
water rates or rights?
Right.
Water rates.
Rates. Got it. Okay.
Which was interesting, because at the time I wasn't really following, local policy. I mean, I was, but I wasn't going to say I was overly active, and I wasn't on the city council or anything. But as I started to study it that summer, they had rolled out, or that spring, the administration had rolled out a new water rate system, which was a very steep graduated system, which meant that your last gallons of water were exponentially more expensive than your first. And I just thought, well, I'm fine slightly, but this just seemed punitive. And at the end of the day, the city has a plethora of water. I'm all for conservation and all of that. We have a lot of other issues, but our water source, is phenomenal, right?
Sure.
And that's not the case for many cities. But ours is. Like I said, we have other things we need to deal with. So we need to be prudent about the water, but on the flip side, it wasn't. And then to make this, well, guess when people get their August water bill? They get it in September. Well, then you have 30 days to pay it, so you're paying it in October. Well, with mail-in ballots, you're getting your ballots right then.
Same time.
And so people are sitting there looking, just going, and who votes? Well, families and senior citizens. Who uses a lot of water? Families and senior citizens. And so, some of it's just dumb luck. And in that case, we had a hot summer. But philosophically, I was, I just did not agree with, the way we were thinking that. And ultimately, it became a huge initiative that gained national prominence. I testified in front of Congress. It is the law of the land today, and that is where when we ran the utilities, they used to have double-digit increases, and that was the double problem. They both redid the rate schedule, and then they also increased, I believe that year, maybe 12 to 16%.
Yeah.
And so, so not only was it going like this, and people's tomato gardens were sucking up water, but the rates, not only the rate structure, but also the rates went up dramatically. So my entire time in, we had committed to rates being at the West Coast CPI. I said, I can at least tell the public that, we need to at least mirror that, which at the time was 2.7, 3.1. And so I said, well, let's get our heads around that. And so philosophically, then that's how we did the, Cleaner River Faster program. And, and we were raising money to basically build these huge tanks to take the combined sewer and stormwater. That's what became Brick West,
exactly.
Which is one of the first ones in the country of where we leased the air rights over one of our tanks. And there was a lot of
pushback.
A lot of pushback.
That's its own episode, actually. One of these times
and now it's one of the premier spots. And really brought an asset to that part of town. When you really look at that, there's a lot of residential there, both old residential, and now actually new residential, and that's people's front yard. And that's their front porch, and that was done by design with great partners, obviously, but that idea came from, in many ways, I went to school in Boston when they redid the Greenbelt. The Greenbelt, that's where awesome. I got that idea. And I said, well, they did it on top of, in that case, it was on top of a transportation asset, the big tunnel when they took the bridge down, but then they leased the top of it to different public entities and private entities to bring an asset to whatever community that was. And one of them actually was, and they responded to the immediate adjoining property. And so some of them are high residential, and so it looks a lot like Brick West, or one has a splash pad because kids live in the high rises.
And just to explain this, because I think there's a lot of people that don't even know this. But what we're talking about is that courtyard to the east of Brick West is not owned by Brick West.
No,
that's
city, never was. So basically what happened was they dug this massive hole in the ground. They had to underpin it. So you got to hold the footings in place as they're going up. Well, that is intruding on our rights on the property. So in exchange, there was a small easement negotiated of, hey, that's why we can have roll-up garage doors. Otherwise, that's zero lot line. We started there, and it was supposed to be one slope from the, what would that have been, first down to Riverside. And then it was all going to be a gradual slope. And I called the office, and I'm like, this can't be right? It's only designed for two things, parking lot or a park. And so we kind of sat down. It was this most collaborative thing I've ever been a part of, because I'm like back to young kid trying to convince people. And all of a sudden it was like, well, wait, what are you going to do without it? And I think you guys had set aside like $200 a month to make sure it was mowed. And I was like, there's got to be a better way. And so for Scott Simmons, I mean, it was a whole effort. And so now on top of it, underneath there, you'll see little access points that they can still access and get to. And it's a pretty cool little tour, actually.
What do you call it?
CSO tank.
Combined sewer overflow. So in essence, the older parts of the city, the actual sewage, like when you flush the toilet, is combined with the storm drains that you see in the middle of the street, right? And so when you have a rain event, people still flush their toilet, but it can overflow the system, and it kind of makes your stomach churn. Right underneath the Monroe Street Bridge is a huge pipe that when it used to overflow, it would just go right into the river. Well, now there's that tank. There's also the big one right by the library. And
there's one in East, is there East Sprague too?
Oh yeah, there's
six. There's six.
There's more than that. There's those are the one also over on East Sprague. Actually, is the playground for the charter school.
So it came off that
Pride
idea.
Prep, and it came from that same idea, which is how can we use these? Because otherwise, the utility company was like, the utility portion of the city was like, well, let's just put a fence around these and gravel them because we want the least amount of maintenance, and we want and that's what you expect them to do, because you want to drive down the cost for the utility ratepayers. So their job is to go out and reduce overhead as much as possible. Amen. So that we can provide low utility rates. But then when you do this, so that's really back to my earlier comments about, well, now let's get the park director in with the utility director and then in with the city attorney to say, how do we legally do this? How does a private entity have access to a publicly owned?
Well, it's super unique because isn't it like quasi-public because it's owned by
totally.
the utility portion?
Yeah.
So like it didn't have to go through the Parks Department.
Yeah, and so in
which
this
was
case,
super unique.
Yeah.
But you'll go if you ever drive by it says public welcome. It's a public park for all intents and purposes.
No,
public
I've
space.
been there
Sorry.
plenty of times, and you guys do a bunch of great events. There's little concerts there. You guys did a pumpkin
We had
carving
the
thing in
symphony
October.
in there, and
Yeah,
I was like,
symphony,
"This is
it's
a
like-
cool." Nobody would envision this.
I mean, I went to in essence, a memorial service for a friend of mine
we had a
that
wake
unexpectedly
there.
passed away. And
So pseudo off topic, but I'm just curious. So holding tanks will hold the overflow when the overflow happens, and then how does it release it
it
back?
gets
release.
metered out.
Yeah.
It
gets metered out.
It gets pumped out
So
when the rain stops.
So did that
and then
completely solve the sewer getting like overflowed in the river?
No,
100%.
the requirement is on a rolling basis that you have a certain amount. You can have a certain amount of overflows per year
Gotcha.
on an annual rolling basis. I mean, and again, the city of Spokane is still on the forefront of this. I mean, many other cities, you go over to the west side, that still just goes into Elliott Bay.
Yeah.
All intents and purposes,
It's supposed to be mostly stormwater. The issue is the systems are just small.
Ours connected on the north side because it's newer. So downtown South Hill combined system, generally speaking.
Yeah.
On the north side, it is separated, and so that's where more recently. But you also, interesting enough, your stormwater going over streets, picking up oils and things like that.
Yeah, I say sewage sounds worse, but
But it
technically
actually-
speaking,
no, in a lot of ways,
algae,
it's not-
fish,
yeah,
all this stuff,
yeah.
Oil, antifreeze, all that kind of stuff is way worse.
Yeah,
than,
much more complex molecules
Correct.
going into the river. So that's what more recently, that's still being built. It's called the Cochrane Basin, and is basically being infiltrated, and that is a partnership in that one with the Parks Department, where they rebuilt the disc golf course in exchange for the utility company using some of the Parks Department property to do an infiltration.
That's such a cool area down there, man. That whole Riverside
amazing.
State
It's
Park
amazing.
area
I mean,
is
I'm a big fan.
Secret be told, I had never been on a raft on the Spokane River till I was mayor. And I forget whether it was the River Keeper, the Friends of the Falls. They're like, Mayor, we would like to get to know you, and we want to take a rafting trip with you. And I'm like, okay, this sounds like a good day at work. But I'll be honest, it was my first time I had ever done it.
So I've never done it.
you
That's
go
why
from
I
like,
need to
like
do it.
TJ Meanock Bridge down through the Bowling Pitcher and
All that, yeah. And so that's what then
That's
caused
awesome.
us to
Is
put
it?
the,
Super
we
Well, you
have
got that launch right there now in the Red Band Park.
the Red Band Park, and and so there's the new launch there that's phenomenal. We also have an outtake. Quite frankly, back to the
There's
tanks.
a launch down. It's like
Well, it's Red Band, but right at the
Right by
bottom,
Band
right
Park.
past Spokane Club.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah,
down the right.
yeah.
So that's the one I was like,
And that's
let's
where
do it.
it's funny, I
The
forget.
zip line?
Well, and I made that announcement, the zip line, during one of my State of the City addresses. And I talked about the budget, and all the wonk, 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 State of the Union or State of the City stuff. And then I make a mention of the zip line. So as soon as I get down, of course, you have to do interviews right afterwards. The only questions were about the zip line. Well, whatever it's been, 7,
what
8 years
policy you want
later,
zip line?
finally,
There's
the zip line.
It should be pretty cool to go right under the bridge and
Yeah.
go down to Red Band. So it's up right off the.
Right off the CSO tank, right
tank.
behind the library. And
Wow.
we built that on purpose with the corner being constructed to where they could
so
bolt
similar
on.
to where the gondola is there.
Just to the left. So it goes
just
closer
south.
to the library.
Yeah.
Yep,
Got
just
it.
south of it.
And so you'll see when they built the access ramp so that they can go into the CSO tank, believe it or not, because that's where the pumps and everything are. They built it with a big corner spot, and they reinforced that corner of the tank so that they could literally put the trapeze, the big metal.
Yeah.
And so then the zip line will go, and it took 8 years or whatever it's been, 7 years. Every time I see the park director, Garrett, I'm just like, hey, where's the zip line?
Come on, man,
And it's like, it's coming, So
That's a fun one. I think a fun one just get even moving along. What are you most proud of? That after you were done, you were able to
And you
reflect
can't
back
say
on
zip
it.
line.
Can't say zip line.
I didn't get it done.
We already put zip line on the top.
To be
It
honest with you,
spurred
I
it.
didn't get that done. I didn't get the downtown stadium done. And those
that
are pretty.
was just a timing thing.
Yeah,
that was
that's
just, you
a pretty
happened to
cool-
not be in office when
Yeah,
it happened.
that's a pretty cool thing.
But-
I'll tell you what I get most excited about is they're interrelated, but was our work with the school district and the libraries, and when we launched. And we went to a middle school system, and that was the number one reason. My administration's motto was building the city of choice. People have a choice of where they live. why, they need to choose Spokane. And people, if there was a guiding light, and it was real, I mean, I used to ask the question, will this choose people to choose Spokane? And that works both when you have to say no to stuff and say yes to stuff, you know? And so things like utility rates. People, now when you buy your house, one of the things that people look at, okay, can I get the utilities for this house for the last, so I can see what the operating costs are. And so that if you keep on increasing your utility rates, quite frankly, on the Alice household especially, the asset limited, income constrained. So these are people buying their first house, or, the working people living paycheck to paycheck. If you go up, double digits, that's going to cause someone not to choose your city. But the number one reason, what's the number one reason why someone buys their house?
School district.
There you go. Schools. And so I learned that in a mayor's course at Harvard before I became mayor. I went to this 1 week course, and they parade successful mayors in front of you and other people. And I remember the mayor of Denver, he asked us, and there was 10 or 15 of us in the class, how many of you guys own your school district? And people raised their hand. And what it meant owned was like it's a department of the city. And I'd forgotten, in New England and many of these places, the school district is part of the city government. And to be honest with you, we spoke earlier about, I'm still a fan of cities owning all the departments, libraries, everything, because the integrations like this one that I was just talking about, you said, what are you so proud of? We got 3 different government entities. People don't know, but the Parks Department is a separate entity within the city government. After you appoint the park board, they really have full say. The employees are city employees, but the management of it, they have their own allocation from the budget, which was brilliant of our forefathers to do, because then as mayor, I never had the option to say, we're going to decrease park funding and put it into police and fire. And quite frankly, the public probably would have supported that at the time, and maybe even today as we deal with these issues. But it's basically hands off. You're not allowed to.
How does that work? Explain that to me.
So in our city charter, I might get this wrong, I think it's 8% of the previous year's expenditures is that year's budget for the Parks Department. So they look, so this year, 2025, the budget was based off, I guess, 2023. So it would be 2023's budget. Whatever the entire city budget was, they get 8% of it. Nice. And then they build their, so it's basically a year in delay, they get their, they also get revenue sources from, leases and things like that. They have program income, programs they run, they charge for some of those, pretty modest, but they still get income from that. But I say all this, the proudest thing was literally getting 3 separate boards of directors. It's the only time to date they had a joint meeting down at the convention center, and they signed the resolutions, and that's what ultimately built our middle schools. And one of the key issues was we looked at kind of like, where the Brick West Plaza is. We had a senior official in my administration that had a real estate background, and we looked at all of the vacant property, and we said, what is the highest and best use? And there was a lot of room. Condon's going to sell all the property. We did sell some things. One of the ones that was the most valuable was where Anthony sits today. The city owned the Anthony's for years. And we sold that, but most of the property was then transferred for public use, in this case for our middle schools, because middle schools take 3 to 5 acres, and so we figured out, well, where do we put these? And so when you say, that's probably one of the proudest things, is both doing that and getting the governments to work. You'll also, we put parks right next to schools so that, there's joint use agreements there. Right now, if you ask the superintendent of public schools, the reality is, middle schools all have 2 gyms, and the public use of those gyms is off the charts.
It's great.
Wow.
It's not just the kids, but it's, it's rec leagues, it's adult rec leagues.
Yeah.
And so I got, to really make that all happen, the Hive is over here on East Sprague. That's actually, the school district had a need for a conference center to teach their teachers, right? The CLEs, and things. Well, they were going to build a standalone thing that would have sat empty but their need, when you think about a program for a building, they had a need for, in essence, large convention space, a couple hundred people.
Right.
Well, we're like, well, that could work with a facility. So now it's
cool.
It's great, and it's right there on Sprague, and it's right across, but they were going to go build that separately. It would have sat, vacant much of the time, except when they were running their seminars and that sort of thing. So to see that happen, and that wasn't easy. I'm not trying to pretend, because there's a lot of laws that, one government entity can't benefit another. But at the end of the day, if you look at your tax bill, it's still the same person paying it in
the whole tax.
The whole tax. And when they can sit there and see that this stuff is coming together, and back to middle schools, I'm not an education expert, but the reality is middle schools is where kids decide what they're going to be when they get older. Young girls decide earlier than boys, surprise, surprise. And so that 6th, 7th, 8th grade is critical in that 6th grade where they start thinking, what do I do if I want to learn math? What do I, if I'm good at math, what's the outcome of that? And so if you can get young people start thinking that. The other cool thing it did was it took physically the kids that were in 6th grade out of the primary buildings, and so that meant it freed up classrooms. So now our K to 3 could have smaller class sizes. So it really physically made that huge opportunity then for both 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, and then you see. I mean, I wish I would have been able to do more of these, but we did it out in Hilliard. The library is inside the junior high, and it's a whole campus, and the Northeast Community Center is right there.
It's really nice.
And now the old library has become a behavioral health medical center, and so it's a super cool campus there. I would have loved to see that at some of our other middle schools, is to actually have the city library part of the fixed facility. But,
that's cool. Yeah, well, one of the other topics, because that is awesome. I know the hard part is nobody ever knows that. That's kind of like I think of that like the electrician. It's like you put all the stuff on the walls and all you see is the outlet.
Right?
All you see is the outlet, right? Yeah. And you don't always get to see the underlying conversations, everything that happened to get there. And our last episode actually that we talked about was how do we because what happened was you made it a really cool place to live.
Yeah.
So somebody asked me, Jordan, are you good? I said, no, I just happen to live in Spokane, the best 5 years ever, where properties appreciated 20% on average.
Yeah.
But they're appreciating because our schools are better, places are better. What were kind of conversations you had? Because that's the good, right? What's the bad of that? Affordability.
Yeah, totally. And now, I mean, I'll be honest with you. I implemented, KPIs at the city, and we had a dashboard. And one of ours was increase median household price faster than what the 20-year average was. And at the time, it barely met inflation. And you're like, well, David, why are you doing that? Because there's the negative side of it now. But at the time, if this was your single, for most households, that's your single biggest investment, right? And if we can't even meet inflation, you probably shouldn't buy a house, right? And so it was one of we need to increase that. Now, fast forward, it went crazy, right? And so to me, as you look at it, that's, especially as we look at housing, and hot topic today, I'm the chair of the Economic Development Committee at Greater Spokane Incorporated, our chamber here, and we are about to release 19 county vitals, where the business community came together that sit on that, committee, and we went through dozens, 35, 50 different measures, and said, what's important to us, and we can't have 30 or 50, but we've settled on 19, but we over-indexed on housing issues and housing affordability. Because now, back to my mantra of, are you building the city of choice? If the housing's too expensive, you're not going to choose to live there, right? And not only that. And so, to me, it's not only can you do that, but you can have both. And we can have affordable housing and look at the cost drivers.
How do we do? I mean, our background's in developing these things. How do you do that?
Well, I think some of it is basic economics, supply and demand, and I think we're going to have a robust picture of some of this is happening, which is what does home ownership look like today, and. So things like zero lot line, multifamily, but fee simple, and so some of those things I have to credit, the last administration and others doing that. I read in the paper that we're looking at height limits today. Now, that's not housing for everybody, absolutely, and it's never going to be. That's not affordable housing, but will people move out of housing and free it up, and then, and like I said, you also have to put assets to where housing converts from rental to home ownership, or frankly, I'm not a person against land trusts, where a non-governmental entity or a nonprofit owns the land and you build a house on it. The house doesn't appreciate as quickly because obviously you don't own the land. But I always say to be millionaires do this, up at Priest Lake and other places and built $500,000 plus houses. I'm just talking about how does somebody get into that, median household, build some equity and then move on from that. And then the house is, is freed up so that you can, and so I think it's not going to be one size fits all. It's, and I do think as we look at some of it is going to be, we're no longer a rural county. We're really a metro county. And so we're going to have to look at where are those nodes around the region, around the county. Otherwise, you are pushing that housing, across state lines, and you're exacerbating some of the issues that we have. And, and I look at developments that are now happening, out north, the Wandamere area. It's its own community. Those people are going to, they live 90% of their time is just in, there's a business district there, there's schools there, there's shopping and entertainment there. That's what I've said, as being the hub city of Spokane. That's why I even said this when we redid Riverfront Park, which is another, I still love it when people, because that was another, when people sit there and go, why did you, run for mayor? I was born in 1974, and I'm like, I am sick of hearing about Expo 74. Can we just be done with this?
Celebration.
But I literally Googled, Expos, and I looked up, and it was 2024 was the first time it was going to be open. I'm like, I'm going to bring the mayor, be the mayor that brings back Expo. But then I did, back to our comments about Boston, I took our parks director at the time, Leroy Eady, to Boston, and I said, because the National League of Cities was meeting, and so we met with the folks that had created the Rosemary Kennedy Parkway. We went down to Providence, Rhode Island, because those, the Olmsted brothers were in Brookline, Massachusetts. They designed those not that park, but they designed the park systems of both of those communities. And so, I remember I said, we're going to redo Riverfront Park. And it's another, legacy project, but the more difficult was definitely the school district and in the parks department coming together and the libraries coming together. But as we look at it, but what is that urban environment that's not just going to be Spokane? And as a region, you look at what's happening in the valley. They have the new Performing Arts Center. They have their new cross country facility track. And so so people build these communities, and we're going to have to get around our heads. But game on, Spokane City. How do you make Spokane City still attractive? And to me, there's no place where you can go and have the arena, the podium, and the stadium. There's no place where downtown and what's there. So we need to preserve it, but really there's a lot of assets there that we just need to leverage.
I think that when you look at housing, it's such a it's such a kind of a complex issue, right? And there's so much nuance, and people love simple answers.
And
so
black and white.
Right, black and white. But being in the real estate world for almost 20 plus years, one of the things that when you're talking to a first time buyer or somebody about housing, they're always worried about the rate that they're paying and the rate that they're getting, right? So what how much is the house and what's my interest rate? And really those are big levers. But going back to, you have your taxes, you have your insurance, you have all your
Cost
utility
of the
bills,
home,
right? And it's and being an investor, I think the only reason I come to notice it is because it's magnified, right? If you own multiple properties, you're like, man, I'm paying X amount of dollars on all these utility bills, right? Or all these taxes. And so housing affordability, I think for me is such a, I'm passionate about it, but it's such a complex thing when you start talking to people about it. And I think people see change and just naturally are adverse to seeing change. But there's so much that I think we can do to create housing affordability. And we talk about supply and demand, and supply and demand is really it's a very simple way to look at it, but affordability, I think, is a better way to look at it.
I totally agree. I'll tell you, I used to always go back, and I don't know if you're familiar with it, but the ALICE, the Asset Limited Income Constrained but Employed. And you look at what that budget is, and the United Way does it across the country. They just redid the data. I do believe it's from 2023. So it's even, but you look at it, and so you look at a family of four, I'm going to get these, but you're getting danger close, into just a, and, if you want a 2-bedroom apartment, so you can quickly go down to it. And that's really where I saw utilities. So if utilities went up a couple $100,
that's your difference.
well, now all of a sudden that was the interest payment on what we don't have control over, quite frankly, interest rates, right? Yeah. And well, if we take that away, or if we put it back on the table and make utility rates lower, now they can go out and pay a higher interest rate, especially as a first-time home buyer that may, not have strained credit, but, people aren't eager to, So to me, I look at it, and if you really want to simplify it, I just look at that Alice every single time. Yeah. And I used to ask my team, if we're going to ask the citizens to do this, even as we went to go do Riverfront Park, I said, so what is it because that was an expiring tax. I go, if we gave that money back to the citizens, what could they do? But if we actually went back and asked for it, what are the things? And that's where there was a little matrix of what are the activities people can do that they would have paid for, and by age group, and so what do you do with your kids over the summer, and so if it's pretty low dollar, to go into Riverfront Park, and what are the things that those kids are going to want to do? And so I look at it, if there's a simple way to look at it is just, especially for leadership, and it's the region's responsibility, it's just not the elected officials. Sure. But you'll notice, and there was an aha moment for me, a bigger impact was not taxes but utility rates. And,
Vista rates, it's combined, right? Not just city controlled.
So if people want to look at something, Google Alice and the Spokane United Way website will come up, and you can put in different and if you look at those, you go, okay, if this went down $100, daycare is a huge number. So if we had universal pre-K, that frees up $500, $600, $700 for somebody, maybe in some cases $1,000, and then not only that, but if they can do that, can another parent go to work, or can you work longer, and so all of a sudden, so now if you free that up, then how do you, so that simplifies it for me because, and it really gets down to
it goes to where it's supposed to go, right? Yeah. That's actually like that approach more is I think too many times we deal with housing by looking at how do we build this house cheaper? Yeah. And I was like, but that's not affordability. But we had an employee that wouldn't take a raise because it bumped her out of the category where she got, and it was $1,200 a month for childcare. Yeah. And I think the tough one that I struggle with, and maybe Keith give an opinion here too, is so that I think they just passed another thing for landlords to pay another fee for something else. And I think what's missed sometimes is they don't understand that most investors bought the houses when they were $200,000. Yeah. What can you charge for rent when it was $200,000 at 3% interest? Yeah. Well, you could charge $1,200 for a 3-bed. Well, as soon as you discourage owning as an investor so much, as soon as that house goes back on the market, it's bought for $470. Yep. It will never rent for $1,400. And so it's almost like these policies to affect affordable housing are actually creating.
And no one wants substandard housing, I get it. But at the end of the day, really what frustrates me with many of those policies, and I had stopped a lot of them because the, quote unquote, the bureaucracy wanted some of these things, is it discourages the mom and pop investor. Yep. And that's really, it discourages the person that, decided rather than putting in the stock market to invest in our community and might have a duplex and a fourplex and they're done. Yep. But now the regulatory burden, the large, apartment, developers, they have in-house attorneys, and they have, they know how to do this. Now the widow that was left Social Security in these places, she or he, whatever, they don't have the capacity, and they're just trying to supplement their income through these. And so then they do go sell them, and then that goes off the market, you know. And so to me, you have to be very careful in those levers that and to what end, to what end is a rental registry? What are you going to do with it? What is the city government going to do with the registry? I don't know, and then, and so that's where, and these things have been around for a long time, and I had advocated against them. There's other mechanisms how you can deal with substandard housing. I also, had to shut down some significant substandard housing. So I wasn't, against that, but it's a little difficult when you start, going down these paths, and then really what happens, and it drives the market up because
100%.
now when there's less players,
Sure.
Those that are left look around.
Like, you're charging this, we'll charge this.
Yeah, we'll charge this, and the market, and so then all of a sudden the levers come in and rent control. So then we've got to stop that, and so all of a sudden you're going from both ends, and that doesn't work. So
Yeah, I like what you were saying earlier about the city, and when you were working there, it's like really forcing those different departments to work together, and sometimes it's easy for them just to segregate into their own little divisions and worry about their own departments. But I think housing's a lot the same way, and what happens is developers or builders or investors a lot of times is you're dealing with all these little like make it affordable, but make it eco-friendly, but make it and so it's like, well, everybody's telling me I have to do this thing, but it's not possible when you start putting all of this stuff
and that
together.
was,
To go,
I
wait,
mean,
you can't make it cheap and affordable and eco-friendly and solar and
unless
and
there's
you
a subsidy
can,
somewhere,
or
right?
it's-
Yes,
but now it's really expensive, right? But I think that there is some middle ground, and I think we just have to start looking at the picture a little bit more holistically. In the sense of I guess more collaboration between these sort of.
you totally, and you nailed it. That's where you provide those assets like schools were, and we purposely, some of those schools are in neighborhoods that, needed that infusion of investment. So to me, and the housing affordability issue is not intrinsically linked to homelessness.
Correct.
And I think that's a whole nother issue. But
we didn't have time for that. We'll get you back for that.
But to me, it's two different, and there's different levers for that, and there's different assets to leverage versus housing affordability and what people are looking for. Where when my kid, who's 16 after college, if he wanted to move back to Spokane to buy a house, not going to happen. As I look at it today with what the wages are. So we need to. It was the same, so we need to figure out that pieces, and the levers are different, like you just talked about, and those debates are going to be in front of us. And like I said, I've seen some of that movement, which is things like
VOCA rules, you get stacked density in those.
Stacked down. So now my kid might be able to, is that their long-term solution? It may be, but we've built our neighborhoods off of 1960s and 70s regulations, right? Which was, single purpose zoning. Now people love, like I said, and, the days of, I remember when I was mayor, one of the big issues was the success of the flying goat. Right?
Yeah, over and down.
And if there was another, but in all intents and purposes, those things had been outlawed. And there was a partnership between myself and the city council president where we went back and we said for 2 years, if a building had ever been commercial, it could go back to being commercial without going through a conditional use permit.
Yeah.
And so you saw, I think there was 15 or 20 sites across the city that that took advantage of that. And really what it meant was it was a commercial building that then when it quit being commercial and was in single density zoning, it was really substandard housing.
Correct.
People were just like, well, got to make this storefront into 2 apartments, and they weren't cool studio apartments, they were rough, but then someone goes, oh, well, I don't have to go through conditional use, and I can just now revert it back to, and so it was pretty cool to see those pop, and now they're an asset, kind of like, Flying Goat was. Now you have to deal with, new, like I said, I go, it's cool that Spokane's, that one, it was about neighborhood parking, and people were real frustrated that they went out, and I get it, so I was like, and it was a big to-do, I was like, well, let's send parking enforcement out there, and actually when you go, I haven't been, in several months, but you go into Flying Goat, they have little signs, let's help us be a good neighbor, and don't park in front of people's driveways, and so. But on the flip side, when people want to go sell their houses in that area, 3 blocks from Flying Goat, so
they're worth more.
They're worth more because people are like, oh, awesome, and now we have those over and over again. But
we dealt with that a little bit with the Garland project actually. Because cut down on some parking, but all I ever picture with that whole block was Ballard.
Oh, totally.
I'm like, that is where you park. And every time we go there, it's our favorite spot. We park 2 blocks in, not in front of a driveway, and then you walk into the retail experience. So,
well, parking problems are good problems to have. I know people don't want to hear that, right?
I know, but they really are, though.
It's
and that's really...
You're going to have problems,
But you have the density, and you have the people, now they spend.
And now that small business can actually make money because they're sitting there. And, and Spokane is super cool. We have, Garland, we have Perry. One of the other things that there was a partnership in my administration administration, the city council, was East Sprague and now North Monroe, and we made all the different funding pots work together, so that we could do utility investments. On East Sprague, it was one of the reasons those upstairs apartments weren't being used as apartments because of fire suppression. Well, we didn't have the water pressure there. Well, that takes the utility company to say, hey, we're going to put in, increased water supply so that we could now meet building code, which is a different department at the city. And then not at that, but we're now going to use community development block grants to put in new streetlights and nicer curbs, and we're going to use community safety dollars to put in curb cuts so that we can put in, ADA ramps. But those programs used to all be different, and actually when you go back and look at it, both physically, but the tax revenue, one of our big metrics was, could we regain the tax revenue in 3 years? And I'll be honest with you, the sales tax and the property tax went up dramatically. So that was one of the paybacks when, we did some of these things, because we used to charge for utility hookups and things like that.
Do you have latecomer agreements with them then?
And that sort of thing. And anyway, so like I said, you can make it happen when you make the pieces come together.
I like to always bring these conversations full circle to some extent. And, but one of the reasons that me and Jordan named this show Chestnut Checkers was kind of like you see people out there, they're doing nuanced things that just like from up front, they don't seem like they're that big of a deal, but like when you start running a city, right? That's what it is. You're playing chess, man.
Well, largest businesses.
But you don't realize that moving this piece over here affects this piece over here. And I think that as citizens, right, myself included, it's easy to play checkers. It's easy to look and they go, oh, they changed that, or my parking.
Shut down the street again.
What is the city doing? And it's but you're just not. So bringing this full circle of like, as a citizen, where do you start getting involved? Where do you start looking for information? Because it's intimidating. I'm obviously a business guy, and Jordan, I know you are. So you get forced to get involved, and I think initially I was always just like, I'm getting drug in there.
You have to be involved.
And then eventually you go, okay, it's in my interest, so I should actually, rather than begrudgingly going down here, I should start, having some foresight into who my elected officials are, or listening, or going to a city council meeting.
Or doing it yourself. I mean, I'll be honest with you, one of the frustrations I had as mayor, I believe at the time we had 35 to 40 different commissions, committees, and that I could appoint to. And business people need to go sit on those. And probably, a big one is the park board. But there is a lot, the plan commission.
So if I'm average Spokane citizen and I've never been involved, what would you recommend would be a good start?
Literally go to the city website and go to boards and commissions. If you live in the county, they have the same thing there. Put in the little search blocks, put boards, commissions. And if there's something that interests you, either personally or within your, commercial business life, go on to those. I mean, because I'll tell you, in today's world, it was hard. We would have to go out and try to find folks, and it really starts giving you a picture of what those impacts are. And what I loved about local government, when we're sitting here on Main Street, right?
That's a good
this
example.
whole parking, sir, this was literally meetings in the mayor's office about, and I said, I said, let's just do a pilot. I found in government that if you did a pilot,
it's actually Brick West was a pilot.
It was a pilot. So I always got because I was like, we're gonna do a pilot.
It's less committal.
And so diagonal parking, the city engineers were vehemently against it. So we did a pilot, and I go, let's do one right out in front of City Hall so we can all look out the window. So we have diagonal parking there. This was mid-block diagonal, mid-street parking. Lessons learned. I see we now have a curb. I didn't realize, and things like that. And then we had the one over by Jack and Dan's, and so we had these. I've noticed we haven't expanded them. I would suggest we do it. I mean, especially around Gonzaga.
Brick West would serve because it's 3 lanes.
And so to me, we probably could expand it now that we've learned that there isn't a million car accidents. But I would suggest
people just throwing it in reverse.
Exactly. Totally, right? Exactly. People think it's so anyway, and
it's
especially
weird.
around.
It's weird that people don't want to get in car accidents.
No, right?
Fair enough.
Presumably we haven't had them. I don't know. I'm not down there anymore. But getting involved, I would say, and people's eyes will be, so do one of the ones that doesn't take a ton of, time. There's some of those, and then there's others that, quite frankly, especially the park board. I used to joke they were at City Hall more often than I was, but that's when we did the big bond for down, for the Riverfront Park. So there was big issues going on then. which we hadn't done in at the time for 40 years. And so that being said, but there's always opportunities there. I mean, even if you're just going to put your toe in the water, there, believe it or not, there's neighborhood councils, which are in our charter. So they aren't the council person, that's elected, but there's actually neighborhood councils that meet typically on a monthly basis. And you go, well, what do they do? Well, all the different departments come and present in front of them. I went to mine. I'm advocating for a roundabout near my house because the street, people just go barreling down the street. So I sat at my little table as we looked at where should be traffic calming, and everybody was laughing, but I was there a couple of years ago, and we were prioritizing where we should put traffic calming. And so, I mean, you can, in that one, you just go when you want, and so, but that's, I mean, and I think people would be amazed. I mean, and it's hugely rewarding, I used to meet with all of them. Quite frankly, it was good business when you're mayor to see people that are interested. A lot of people just get appointed and never meet with the mayor. I'm like, nope, I want to meet all of them, not for hours, but 20 minutes. And we'd do, 15 on an afternoon, and my head would be spinning, but I'm meeting all these people that are interested in local government and what are their ideas. And cool. And so I would suggest, and there's always openings. And I actually always, I took a stance that you're not going to get renewed year in and year out. I'm like, at some point we should force ourselves to get other people engaged. And you'll find some people were on some of these committees for years, and you're like, it's, why don't you try out a different committee, and so that we could, but then it was incumbent upon, the mayor's the giant outreach person so I'd force my staff, let's figure out how to, well, it's just easier to reappoint people. And I'm like, well, no, we're going to, let's go figure out, let's go look for people to take these positions,
So, kind of wrap things up a little bit. What do you see though as next for Spokane? I'm just curious, but I see obviously Western Washington and Eastern Washington, and I see Spokane's this, we're the main, we're the staple out here in Eastern Washington, Tri-Cities, but what is Spokane? What do you think Spokane's future looks like?
I'm still pretty bullish on Spokane. We do have some issues that we need to address in public safety, and those need to be addressed straight on. Separate from that, like in my involvement now in economic development, we really have some foundational industries, and they're being recognized, nationally, if not globally. The aerospace material,
that's a big win.
That is a huge win. We're known for that. The other is in life sciences, and in particularly, as you look at where where that research is, that's another key. People don't realize this, but even a lot of cardiac research, the whole, open heart surgery was really developed here in Spokane. That was the Heart Institute, and that now has become standard of care globally. You look where we are in energy, and you think of the spinoffs of Avista, whether it be Itron or Ecova, and what's coming out of, that sector. As I look at it, as you look at those industries, so health sciences or life sciences, you look at energy as an industry, and you look at aerospace, but then, across those industries are sectors, and people go, what do you mean? And I mean, so there are advanced manufacturing. So in each one of those industries, there's advanced manufacturing. In many ways, because of our cost structure as a state, you really in manufacturing need to be in that advanced manufacturing in order to have the margins to be able to afford the cost structure of our state. So not good or bad, but just the reality. And so what do I mean? Well, that's in aerospace, or even as you look at the agriculture industry, advanced manufacturing is things like winemaking. There's higher markup in winemaking, and so that type of advanced manufacturing. And so as we produce a workforce, whether that be at the community college level or at the 4-year degree level, we really need to focus in advanced manufacturing across those key industries that we're known for globally, right? And many of them cross-fertilize. We have aerospace manufacturers that are also life sciences manufacturers because it's very similar. The level of technology is very high.
Yeah.
The expertise needed by, you even look at, Jubilant Hollister Steer.
Yeah.
It's advanced manufacturing in life sciences.
Yeah.
But the technical skills those individuals need translate very well over into high-tech aerospace, right? Because of the technological. We also, is another sector is professional services, accountants, lawyers, finance folks. In every one of those industries, you need finance and then the next industry is next sector rather is knowledge base, so research. So we should be doing research in each one of those industries and knowledge base. So as we look at and technology in each one of those industries, and so I always encourage people to look at the industries that we've been known for years. One of the biggest conventions that goes on in this community is the Ag Trade convention that was last week. Now people we don't have fields in this urban environment, so we aren't going to have the primary sector, which is really the extraction piece that we're known for, but we all of a sudden have the secondary, advanced manufacturing. We have the tertiary, which is financial services. One of the biggest financial institutions in this community is Northwest Farm Credit Services. So it's in the ag industry, but in the finance sector. And so to me, as a community, we need to be prepared in those, advanced manufacturing, professional services, and in research, but stick in those industries that we have years and decades of knowledge. And not only that, but when you look to investors, especially kind of VC investors, they're going to go in an industry that they know. And so, I might be a 30-year, career person at one of our energy companies, Itron, Ecova, or Avista. If there's a startup by a professor at Eastern, that's the one I'm going to invest in. I'm not going to invest in an industry I know nothing about. So if you want that $25,000 and $50,000, investment, it's going to be in an industry people understand. Otherwise, you might as well go down to Vegas and put it in the slot machine, right? And so to me, as we get identified in those industries, and that's really, even as we look at aerospace, that advanced manufacturing, especially in materials, that this new hub, that really brings all those pieces together. It's going to be workforce, it's going to be research, and ultimately it's also going to be production of materials that are going to be the future of aerospace. And so, and I bet a lot of those same materials will be used in the health or life sciences. I just have a sneaky suspicion a lot of the materials, laminated plastics and others that they'll use for aircraft will be used in healthcare.
For a heart valve or something.
Exactly, right? And so there's a lot of, and so to me, as I look at those key industries, then you look in the sectors that actually we can compete in, and I think we can.
It's funny because now my whole role is I just tour people not from here through here. And so I get to be like a tourist twice a week, and you're trying to explain to them. First question always is, where's our industry? Gotten that a little better, and you can kind of speak to that volume of them. But what's the best takeaway I ever take from it is that we think Spokane did its run up. They think Spokane now is where it needs to be to run up. And I never think about it, but they're all from New York, and they're like, no, that got you to even. We see this thing going even further. And so I think I'm always encouraged by that, because I look around the same thing, and sometimes you can get jaded of like, no, it's called the North-South Freeway Complex. No, we've talked about that forever. It just never happened. It's the, I mean, it's the zip line, right? We just talked about it. I said, what I said was different, though, is that we're doing it now. And it's not led by one little group.
And that's what's great.
Have a ton of different people. And I was like, so I become this awesome sales. If GSI ever needs somebody that just is out selling this thing, I'm like peddling it, because I'm like, no, I've been Boise. Boise had a great, but every major fund is in Boise. This is still a market that is yet to grow, because of an injection of massive fun type movement. So to that same point, I love it. And that's all stuff I don't even know. Like, I'm not selling it because I like riverfront walk, right? Let alone literal job transformation.
Well, and so I'm hearing like episode 2.
Oh, it'll be a
the last 5 minutes, 2. I'm like, wait, I want to talk for another hour about just that thing.
Condon's a 3-hour one, but but obviously your opinion is awesome on it. I wish you could run for mayor again and do that, but
Like I said, I seem to
today.
do everything in 7
I was
to
gonna say,
9
it's gonna come
year
back
chunks. I can't keep a job. I couldn't keep a job in the Army. I couldn't keep a job in Congress.
That's so good.
When I was leaving, probably a few months before I left mayor, I remember my chief of staff, she's like, it sure seems like you want to get out of here. I'm like, yeah, we're
It's
good to
time.
go. Let's go.
Oh, it's awesome.
And you were in the middle of, a bunch of projects, but you're just like, it's great. Let's, move on.
They're moving. Hard part's done.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has been great, guys. I
Awesome.
appreciate it.
Thank you so
Thank you
much
so
for
much for your
having me.
time.
Yep,
Absolutely appreciate it.
I'm excited.
All right, you guys, thanks for listening to today's episode. While you're out there, would you please do us a favor and give us a like, subscribe, or a follow, whether you listen on Spotify, iTunes, or YouTube. We'd really appreciate it. Also, if you don't mind while you're there, give us a 5-star review. Maybe write a review. If you have a favorite episode, feel free to give it a like. Thanks for listening. We really appreciate it.